What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, I want to show you a beautiful game where Alireza Firouzja absolutely shocks the GOAT Magnus Carlsen. This game took place in the 2024 Speed Chess Championships. It was a shocker right out of the opening. Here's how it started. In the game, Magnus opens 1 e4 and Alireza 1 c5 is the move. All right, knight f3, knight to c6, and now normally Magnus does go bishop b5, the Rosalimo. It's a very solid opening, very trendy at the highest level, but instead in this game, d4 was played, heading immediately for the open Sicilian. Now black takes, white takes back, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, and sure enough, the Sveshnikov was the move of choice. e5, driving back that knight. The knight goes to b5, and now here, this is the big shocker of the game. Normally here, black will go for the move d6, guarding that d6 square. Of course, the queen would then control it, but instead in this game, bishop c5 was the move. Now, this move is extraordinarily rare, especially at the highest level, because obviously white has the option of jumping in with his knight, and then black would effectively have to give up his dark squared bishop for that knight, and even then he couldn't castle as the queen on d6 would block this diagonal. All right, what is Magnus going to go for? Well, knight d6 is one move. Bishop b3, according to the end, is actually a little bit stronger, but in the game, Magnus did go knight d6, jumping in with his knight. All right, now black goes king to e7, marching up with his king. Then we have knight f5, hitting the king, king to f8, and then finally the move bishop e3, challenging the bishop on the e3 square. Now, so far, obviously, with the knight jumping in to d6, then f5, forcing the king to move. Black here, he cannot castle later in the game. That is a very important detail. And now, if those dark squared bishops come off the board, what is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, I want to show you What is going on, Chess YouTube? So in today's video, we're looking at a crazy game where Alireza Firouzja, he absolutely shocks Magnus Carlsen right out of the opening as black. Now, this game took place in the 2024 Speed Chess Championships. It is truly a shocker. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, Magnus opening 1 e4 and Alireza 1 c5. The Sicilian defense is the opening of choice. Now we have knight f3, knight c6. So far, very common stuff. And now normally white at the highest level, especially for Magnus, he normally goes bishop b5. That is the Rosalimo variation. But instead, in this game, sure enough, he goes for the move d4, heading for the open Sicilian. Now black takes, white takes black. Black goes knight f6. We have knight to c3. What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're looking at a truly shocking game where Alireza Firouzja absolutely shocks Magnus right out of the opening. This game was unbelievable. In the game, Magnus opens 1 e4 and Alireza 1 c5 is his move of choice. Then we have knight f3, knight c6, and now, of course, Magnus, if you watch any of his games as white in the Sicilian, he almost always goes bishop b5, the Rosalimo in this line, and the Rosalimo is thought to be at least a tiny bit better for white. It's a very simple, safe line, somewhat similar to the Roy Lopez opening, but instead in this game, Magnus does go d4, allowing the open Sicilian after knight c6. That is very, very rare. We'll have to see what both players have in mind. All right, Alireza, c takes, then we have knight takes, then we have knight f6, putting pressure on that pawn on e4, knight c3 defends, and then finally the move e5, driving back that knight on d4. White goes knight d to b5, very standard stuff, and now here, black will almost always go d6. The point being, when you go d6, the queen covers that square, and knight d6 ideas are not possible. Now, in this position, instead of doing that, here, Alireza, he shocks the entire chess world by playing the ultra rare move bishop c5. Now, what is the problem with this move right here? It's very, very simple. White can jump in with his knight to d6, hitting the king with check, and then you got to either give up your precious dark squared bishop or move the king and give up the right to castle. Now, beyond that, white can also go bishop e3 immediately. That move actually is maybe even a little bit stronger than the alternative, but instead, knight d6 played in the game. Jumping in with the knight is Magnus, and here Alireza he doesn't take the knight. He goes king to e7, the BONGCLOUD style move, giving up the right to castle, but of course, attacking the knight on d6 with the bishop and the king. All right, now white, knight f5 is the move, dropping back with that knight, and of course, pressuring the king on the e7 square. Black goes king to f8, and then we have the move bishop e3, offering the trade of dark squared bishops. Now, if those bishops come off the board, that is going to be excellent for white. White's knight on e3 will be eyeing d5 and so on, and white is going to have a tremendous game. Therefore, with that in mind here, Magnus Carlsen, he has to go bishop b4, ignoring the trade, pinning the knight on c3 to the king, threatening bishop takes c3, threatening to damage white's pawn structure, and here, shockingly, Magnus is actually not really fighting for that much of an edge. Alireza Firouzja, despite his insane opening with bishop c5, he's actually doing relatively okay here. All right, now Magnus, knight g3, dropping back with that knight. This is a slightly dubious move because here Alireza, he can simply break in the center with the move d5. He does that, sure enough, and now already on move 10, Alireza is fighting for the advantage out of the opening, despite his insane opening with his king stuck on f8. But it turns out everything is going to work out perfectly for the second player. All right, now here, obviously, white has the option of trading on d5, but that is so incredibly dangerous. For example, if you do that, after e takes, say, knight takes d5, black's going to have all this pressure on this knight on c3. Again, that knight is pinned, and black is threatening knight takes, b takes, then bishop takes, forking the king and the rook on the a1 square. Therefore, you simply cannot open the game that fast. Instead, in the game, bishop d2 was chosen. Of course, black is threatening d4, forking the bishop and the knight. Therefore, bishop d2, it does two things. Number one, stepping out of that future pin of the d-pawn, and number two, trying to block the attack of the bishop on the knight, blocking that pin. But here, Alireza, he is not slowing down one bit. He goes d4, driving back that knight on the c3 square. Where's he going to go? In the game, knight b1 is the move for Magnus, but now Alireza, he just avoids the trade of bishops, and he slides back, bishop d6, a perfectly fine move. And now look at this, piece placement for black. His knight's excellently placed, his bishop very, very good, and the king on f8. It's actually not that bad of a square for the king, as we're about to see. Alireza, he's going to have the option of going for the alpha 0 advance, h5, then h4, capitalizing on the very awkward placement of the knight on g3, and from there, the rook on h8 is going to be perfectly placed. All right, white, bishop d3 is the move, supporting the pawn on e4, very important, and now Alireza, h5, expanding on the king side, threatening h4, and if you're a beginner, whenever one side has the knight on g3 or g6, it's always an option to launch those h-pawns down the board and try to drive it back. It's almost always a dangerous idea. Now here, Magnus, he goes h3, trying to defend on the king side, but Alireza h4, driving back that knight, sure enough, is the move. Now, knight e2 is the move for the goat, and here Alireza, knight to h5. He's jumping out to the h5 square with the knight, eyeing the f4 square, and beyond that, opening up the scope of his queen on this diagonal here. All very, very important. All right, here, Magnus, c3 is the move. He's got a counterattack in the center. As they say, a flank attack is best met by an attack in the center of the board, so c3 makes a lot of sense. You're pressuring d4, trying to open things up, but here Alireza, he simply ignores the pawn on c3, and he goes for the key advance g5, supporting his pawn on h4, and very importantly, threatening a move like g4, which would open up the g-file theoretically. And keep in mind, that pawn on g5 on g4 would be very well supported by the bishop on this diagonal, so that is a very real threat. All right, now, Magnus, knight a3 is the move. A very provocative choice. I mean, first of all, you are allowing black to take on a3. And second of all, if you take on c3, this knight won't be able to recapture towards the center of the board. Now, is Magnus just begging black to capture on a3? Well, it certainly looks that way. And here, Alireza, bishop takes a3, sure enough, is the move. Now, personally, I'm not crazy about this kind of move in general. This dark squared bishop for black is just so important. Yes, you do damage white's pawn structure after the move b takes a3, but it's a very risky double-edged decision, and oftentimes the bishop pair is a little bit easier to play with than black's more compact pawn structure. All right, now in the game, Alireza, knight f4 is the move, showing one of the other ideas of that advanced g5. The g-pawn also bolstering the knight on the f4 square. Therefore, if white trades on f4, black can recapture towards the center of the board, and that is what happens. So we have knight takes f4, then g takes f4, then bishop b5, putting pressure on that knight on c6. Now here, Alireza, he ignores that knight completely and instead decides to activate his rook on the open or the semi-open g file. Rook g8 is the move, a very good move, setting up threats on that pawn on g2. Now here the goat, he takes on c6, bishop takes c6, then d takes c6, and then we have c takes d4, capturing towards the center of the board. And of course, Alireza, you don't want to go e takes d4. That would leave your pawns on the f file just incredibly weak. Therefore, queen takes is the move, threatening the rook on the a1 square, potentially in certain lines. Now here, white, bishop b4 check is the move. Now, fortunately, the queen on d4 is defended by the pawn on the e5 square. Therefore, black is not losing his queen. Now we have king to e8, the king returning to where it started in this game, going e8 to e7 to f8 and then back to e8. Now we do have the queen trade. Queen takes e4 or d4, then e takes d4. Then we have rook d1, the rook sliding towards the center of the board, and of course pressuring that pawn on d4. Now we have rook takes g2, the rook flying into the game, capturing that pawn on g2, and of course white recaptures on d4 as well. Rook takes d4, maintaining the material balance. Now Alireza, bishop to e6 is the move, centralizing his bishop. Then we have king to e2. The king marches up one square. Rook d8 offers the rook trade, and we do trade rooks. Rook takes d8, king takes d8, and then king to f3. The king marches up and threatens the rook on g2. Now we have rook g6, Alireza retreating his rook. King takes f4, gobbling up that pawn, and then bishop takes a2, winning the pawn on the a2 square. Now we have rook d1, attacking the king on the d8 square. King to e8, bishop a5, bishop b6, retreating. Rook d8 hits the king. Of course, the bishop on a5, guarding the d8 square. Therefore, rook d8 is a possibility. The king goes up to e7. Then we have rook to a8, threatening the pawn on the a7 square. Now we have bishop takes h3, gobbling up that pawn. Rook takes a7 check, hitting the king. King to e6, bishop d8, and then finally here, Alireza, in this position, he makes a very serious blunder that nearly throws away the game on the spot. Now, the best move here is simply rook g8. You retreat your rook back to the back rank, hit the bishop on d8. You're doing just fine. Now, instead of that here, Alireza, he plays the move f5. Now, this is a critical mistake, as you can see by the eval bar just skyrocketing up on the left. What is wrong with this move? It's very simple. Here, Magnus has the option of taking on f5, and from there, black's pieces are all going to be really poorly coordinated. For example, e takes f5. Now what do? The pawn forks the king and the rook. Therefore, bishop takes is forced, and now we have the move rook to e7 check. And get a load of this. If you go to f6, white's going to have all kinds of discovered attacks. For example, rook e5 with the discovered attack of the bishop on the king. For example, king f6 is met by rook e5. You hit the king with check and then take on f5, and you are just winning. Now, instead of that, in the game, king d6 was chosen. But of course, the problem with this move, you give up the defense of the bishop on f5 on the spot. So king takes f5 chosen in the game. Now you're up a piece, literally. I mean, you have the extra bishop on d8. If Magnus can just consolidate here, he's going to have a completely winning endgame. So we have rook g8, the rook retreats, rook e6 hits the king. Then we have king d5, and finally, bishop takes h4, gobbling up that pawn on the h4 square. And here in this position, Alireza, he's down a bishop, he's down a pawn. He is forced to resign on the spot. Not forced, but effectively forced to resign on the spot to Magnus Carlsen. What an unbelievable game, starting with the very insane idea in the Sveshnikov Sicilian. Instead of going d6, obviously the main line, there's a lot of very long lines after that move. Instead, bishop c5 chosen in the game. Now, I don't recommend this in your own games, but it worked out here for Alireza because Magnus, he didn't find the strongest move. That is bishop e3. Instead, knight d6 was chosen, forcing king to e7. And from there, Alireza, he somehow took over in the game after knight f5, king f8, bishop to e3, offering the trade, and then instead of trading, he simply goes bishop b4, pinning the knight on c3 to the king on the e1 square, and from there, he is just taking over in this game. What a fascinating development here. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video of Alireza shocking Magnus, but Magnus, sure enough, winning in the end. If you enjoyed the video, go and smash that like button and subscribe to my channel. It really does help me out a ton, so I do appreciate that. And by the way, if you want to see all of my socials, check out my description box. I have a whole bunch of stuff there. You can find me everywhere on Twitch, on X/Twitter, Instagram, and so on. I'm trying to do a lot more stuff for you guys, so feel free to check out the description. I will be streaming shortly here for you guys, and hopefully getting some other very exciting things for you as well. So feel free to reach out to me on any of those socials, use any of those links. And if you want to see another game, another crazy game between Magnus Carlsen and Alireza Firouzja, you can check out this video right here where Magnus plays an unthinkable rook sacrifice against Alireza's French defense. That game was really wild. So if you want to see a wild game, check out that video right there, and I'll see you in the next video.